Okay, so we'll just start with the prayer in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Augustine. Okay.
Sorry,
no, that's okay.
Just let me know if I'm out of the field. So today we're going to cover three main schools of thought which came in the Hellenistic era. And that Hellenistic era begins about 300 BC, and it's associated with the start of the Roman Empire and the spread of Greek thought further outways due to the expansive militant successes of Alexander the Great. Right, now the three main schools of thought are Stoicism, which we will cover today in the most depth. There's also Epicureanism, which you've probably heard of before. Less well known is Skepticism, which is a school of thought that emphasizes very heavily how little we know. But also there's an ethics based on that. At the same time, you also had the academics. Now, in this context, academics means those who continue the school of thought that began in the academy. And who was the founder of the academy?
Plato.
That's right, Plato. And you've also got the Paripatetics, who are the followers of Aristotle. Okay, so they're those 1, 2, 3, 5 schools of thought. I think what I'll do today is I'll start by, because we've only got an hour today, I'll start by saying a few words just more or less in passing on Epicureanism and Skepticism. And then, because I want to do something in a bit of depth, I'm going to focus more on Stoicism after that, okay? So with the heritage of Plato's thought, there were different lines of interpretation that would emphasize different aspects of his thought. Some would focus more on the earlier Socratic dialogues. Some would focus on the middle and later dialogues in which there was more system building and more metaphysics. Those who emphasized the earlier dialogues, the emphasis was more on that Socratic idea of knowing that we do not know. Okay? And there was a school of thought that took that and sort of took it even further. So you had the academics who were sort of mildly skeptic, following in the footsteps of Socrates. But then you had the skeptics who took that even further. And they even said that we do not even know that we do not know. So the academics would say, I know at least that I don't know. But the skeptics, the Pyrrhonian skeptics, that is, Pyrrhonian skeptics, this is a particular type of skepticism. I'll spell that out for you. I'm going to have to double check that a bit later, the exact spelling, but it's close. They said of any statement, there were different ways in that there was different approaches to this, but they said of any statement, you couldn't know whether it was true or false. So, so they would say, there's no point getting emotionally involved or worked up about anything because we don't know what statements are false and what are true, or what's true about reality. So it enabled them to have this sort of indifference and detachment, a very different form of indifference and detachment of, say, the Stoics or the Epicureans, because it's based on a radical agnosticism. Yes? Thank you. Pyr. Thank you. Pyrrhonian skepticism. You'll find skepticism either spelt with a K or with a C, depending on if it's American or English. I think we go with C in Australia. Yeah, I think the more Greek that you read, you start doing with K because it, All right, so that's all I'm going to say about that. Yeah.
Radical skeptics, and they didn't know. Was there any ethics that came from that?
Oh, what you mean? What particular things to do?
Yeah.
To be honest, didn't look that far into it, but I mean, obviously, it raises the question of how could you base? I mean, it seems it would allow you to go and kill someone because we don't even know whether it is wrong or right. I'll look into it for you if you like. I'll email you. But there are contemporary forms in the 20th century of radical postmodernism are sort of in this line of thought. Obviously, there's important differences. The main difference being the emphasis on language and culture. But that will do for that. So Epicureanism. I'll just bring up my notes on here. So you would have heard the word eudaimonism or eudaimonianism from Aristotle, okay? Now he's got his own brand of eudaimonism, which is based on virtue as when our character is informed by reason and our emotions are regulated and guided by reason. But there are actually different types of eudaimonism. So eudaimonia is roughly translated as happiness or flourishing. And it's not just, when we say happiness in English, it tends to mean how we feel in the moment, whereas for the Greeks, eudaimonia was more of an ongoing thing that you had achieved, your flourishing, your success as a human being, whether your life is worth living. So Epicureanism is a type of hedonism because happiness is equated with the experience of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Now, when we hear the word hedonism, we think of all sorts of, pagan activities where they're all feasting and other things, other unspeakable things happening. Okay, but that's not what hedonism means here. It's more to do with the cultivation of a mental tranquility. Yes. So it's not to do with extravagant, intense experiences. Does anyone know why they wouldn't encourage you to have these intense experiences, whether that's sex or drugs or gorging yourself on food? Well, that's not the main argument. The main argument is that, and I think there's truth to it, is the more intense your pleasure is, the lower the low is. And also, the more attached you are to these passing pleasures, the more fear you're going to have of losing them. So best to those things that we can't control as much, and those things that cause us to have that the low afterwards, We should avoid them as much as we can. So a very different form of hedonism compared to what we normally associate with the term. So it's about moderation and prudence, and also as part of their philosophy, they would emphasize that we shouldn't be afraid of death, and we shouldn't be afraid of the gods, because either the gods don't exist, or if they do exist, they don't have anything to do with us. Okay, so a lot of their philosophy of life is to do with, well, let's not be sad or afraid of any of these things, because we can only control certain things. And friendship is a big part of Epicureanism. So they'd form these fairly intimate friendship groups in which you would share ideas and live the good life together. All right. And they were empiricists and materialists. So they didn't believe that there was such a thing as a separate world or separate substance called soul or spirit. Okay. They were empiricists in the sense that they believed that knowledge was completely based on sense experience, in contrast to Plato's idea that we ascend to the realm of ideas.
How the skeptics see concepts that come from Socrates, the Epicureans also see their beliefs as having a foundation.
Oh, that's a good question. Not as far as I recall, no. I mean, there might be, but I hadn't come across it. I mean, there's bound to be something somewhere. All right, so that's those two schools of thought. Now we'll get on to Stoicism. What's interesting about Stoicism is that you do actually see traces of it in the New Testament. And Paul, it's well known that Paul was using the language and some of the concepts of Stoicism, but he was adapting them. One of the notions taken from Stoicism is the idea of the logos. I mean, this idea of the logos wasn't just in Stoicism. You had it in Neoplatonism. Logos meaning a universal principle. Think of a cause that's present everywhere throughout the universe, giving things order, both order within each individual thing, each individual creature, and order between different entities as if they were parts of the same organism. Yeah. This goes back to also Heraclitus. And I haven't gone into a lot of the theology of this, but what I've read is that the use of the word logos, although obviously it's got a particularly Christian tone in the New Testament, and it's identified with a person, the second person of the Trinity, it's the same. There's philosophical sides to it that are still there, that come from this heritage. Other virtues, yeah. Testing me, because I know that there are traditions that come through all the way through to Aquinas, and how we came to have the 7 deadly sins, I think, was through Stoicism, through a Christian commentating, but I can't remember which one it was. The classic for acquired virtues, fortitude, temperance, justice, prudence, they were in Aristotle, and I think even in Plato. Not sure about the Plato, but definitely Aristotle. But virtue was a concept that cut through all the different schools. All right. So sorry, I've sort of jumped ahead to go backwards from how Stoic influenced Christianity. The word Stoicism etymologically comes from this Greek phrase "stoa poikile," which means the decorated porch, or the porch that held all these murals on it in Athens, in the Agora, which is the market and meeting place. And that was where these particular philosophers met, hung out and met and chatted and preached, I suppose. So we're about 300 BC when this starts. There are different phases. So you've got first, second, and third phases of it, and it changes. I don't want to go into the details of that, but it goes all the way through to the Roman Empire, sort of propagating itself and changing. And then you get these famous figures. They all have important differences, but I'm just going to pass over those: Cicero, Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. This is not part of our discussion. Looked at as a whole, Stoicism is a system with three main parts. That's physics, logic, and ethics. And they are distinct but interconnected. So in order to know how to live, you need to know how to think, which is logic. But in order to know how to think, you need to know about physics, which is we can roughly translate as natural philosophy plus physics. Sorry, natural philosophy plus metaphysics and cosmology. This is what the world is like. This is a very broad category, and it would include the topics that today we'd call philosophy of language, logic, rhetoric, philosophy of mind. Sorry, no. I didn't hear that anyway when I was reading about it. Mathematics more a distinct subject. Yeah. And ethics is obviously to do with how to live well. Just a side point on ethics is today we make a distinction between meta-ethics and ethics proper, or special practical ethics. Meta-ethics is when you're asking questions like, what does it mean to be happy? What is virtue? Why be moral at all? What makes something moral and immoral? It's the more basic, fundamental questions, more abstract and deeply philosophical. When you go into practical ethics, it's more questions like, is it acceptable to steal, and if so, under what conditions? Right, that's more applied. I said practical ethics, I meant applied ethics. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, the Stoic system has these three parts, and see them as distinct but interconnected and interdependent. As for their physics doesn't mean what we mean it today. It means natural philosophy, and pretty much the same as how Aristotle used the term, but they had a different natural philosophy and metaphysics. They were materialists. They didn't believe that there was such a thing as spirit or mind in Plato's sense or in the Christian sense. They believed that there is pneuma, which in Greek means breath, but they said that was an especially refined form of matter. So they were monists in the sense they believed everything was one type of thing. Everything was material, but mind, spirit, God, those entities which in other traditions we would say that's soul, that's non-material entity. They'd say it is material, but it's especially refined. There's actually one church father who took that, believed the same thing, and that's Tertullian. It didn't catch on though. Didn't catch on. So they're materialists. Nonetheless, they still try to incorporate into their system logic and the intelligibility of the world, and even it's sort of a surprising mix, because they believe in their own version of natural law. So there is a universal, objective, divine law that we should abide by. And someone who said that they were materialists these days would possibly not believe in this sort of divine law or natural law, but they did. And I actually find some of their sayings on natural law or divine law quite powerful and very adaptable to a Christian reworking. And in fact, Aquinas does quote for them and approves a lot of the Stoic idea of natural law in order to work out his own theory of natural law. Where are we? Okay, so materialists, they believe that there are two. There's not a independently existing mind or soul, but there are these other entities that don't exist in themselves, but they subsist, which is something weaker than exist. It's hard to define this. Called incorporeal. So they're not bodies, but they depend on body for their existence. And these are time, place, void, which is the space through which matter moves, and this thing called lecta. And this is quite a unique and characteristic aspect of the Stoic philosophy. Now, lecta means that which can be said, or the sayable. So if you look at any entity, in any physical entity or situation or reality, there's going to be aspects of it that we can talk about. The intelligible aspects of it. They are not, that's not a body, but it's something that depends on body to exist. So the particular configuration of some atoms, say square or cube, that is a sayable, that is an intelligible determination. That's not a body, but it's a way in which body is. So they're trying to be materialists and sort of smuggle in some intelligibility in there without bringing in mind in the Platonist sense, or even in Aristotle's sense. They do believe in God, but he is a material God. And yet it's not, they do call him Zeus, but it's not actually an anthropomorphic individual God like one of the pantheons of gods, which you get in polytheism. It's a universal principle. Just think of Logos, really. Logos. Circulating amongst all things and bringing order to the whole. And this presence of organizing everything and determining the course of events in the universe is divine law or natural law, depending on if you're looking at it from the point of view of God or the point of view of the natural beings in the universe. We'll get to ethics in a moment. They believed in this thing called pneuma, I mean, that word is used a lot in different ancient philosophies, used in the Bible, in the Greek, a lot. It's used for the Holy Spirit. It's used for the human soul. It's got a more broad meaning here with the Stoics, because it means pneuma is an energetic principle in things that has it has a breathing type of movement where there's an outward breathing and an in breathing. So it sort of pulsates, goes in and out. And in that outward movement, the outward movement of pneuma creates the different qualities in an entity, and the inward movement gives it its unity. So every individual being, they wouldn't use the word creature because that means it's created. Every being is one, and that oneness is the effect of pneuma sort of contracting. But it's also manifests itself in different qualities, and that's the extraction. I mean, that sort of analogy to breathing or even circulation, you get that in German thought. You get it in Goethe, for instance, and you get it in Hegel, and that sort of comes from Stoicism. Yeah.
What about pneumonia? Because that's a breathing part.
Yeah, well, pneu is breath, monia. I don't know what that means. Something to do with the lungs, yeah. But there were different levels of pneuma. So there's the very basic, which is just, say you've got a non-living rock that's got pneuma in a very basic sense. So this is not animism. It's just saying there's some energy in it that gives it its coherence. And then you've got a higher level at the plants level, and then you've got a higher level with the animals. Okay. But remember, this pneuma is just a very refined type of matter. So what the Stoics are doing, they are distinguishing between matter and this, body and this other principle, organizing principle, which Aristotle would have called form or soul. But they don't want to say it's immaterial. They want to say it's just on the other end of the continuum, where you've got coarse matter and rarefied matter on either side. Okay. They have the four elements: fire, earth, water, air, plus pneuma. And they believe in, just like the atomists. Remember the atomists, one of the first philosophers we did? Yeah, the cycles of the cosmos. So you've got a destruction of all things, and then chaos, and then in that chaos, a cosmos is born, and then it has a life cycle, and then and that goes on forever. That's definitely much in contrast with the Judeo-Christian understanding of time, in which time is linear. It doesn't have this constant recurrence. All right, now we're going to do ethics, which goes from here to here. So as I said, ethics is the study of how to live, the study of how we should act. And because the shaping of our character and our beliefs is related to that, it's going to be the study of the virtues of character. And you'll also get in there other topics such as, are we free? Why do we sometimes act irrationally? How can we develop our character? So, as I said before, it's a type of eudaimonism that the Stoics have. And in that, they're on the same page as Aristotle and the Epicureans, but their understanding of happiness is different. Happiness dash flourishing, being fulfilled as a human being. And just sort of speaking from my own personal perspective now, I actually really like this idea, and I think it's powerful, and I think it's true, that happiness essentially is about living in agreement with divine law. I like that because rather than start with the emphasis on your own flourishing, it's starting with something which is primary and universal and sovereign and divine, obviously. And it makes our happiness depend on that. We've got to be in agreement with it. So the sorts of metaphors or analogies that you get in Stoicism have to do with going with the flow of the natural law, or running with it as opposed to resisting it. So I think about being in a river and you're either going upstream or downstream. So if the divine law or the will of Zeus, which is rational, it's not just an arbitrary decision that Zeus makes. It's completely rational. In order to be happy and fulfilled as a human being, you've got to be in alignment with divine law or with universal reason. Okay. And I think you don't have to do much to make that work in a Christian context. I think it's quite good. What do you think?
Well, I'm just thinking, two things going through my head. One is Marcus Aurelius, who I read about. He's very strongly anti-Christian.
Oh, yes.
And yet, when you read what he writes, it fits really well with
Yeah.
Christianity. But I was sort of harkening back to Augustus. I was thinking, well, Augustus was very conservative, through overt out. He was trying to maintain a belief in God. And then I was thinking back to Socrates, where he was sort of accused of being against the gods. And I was trying to sort of briefly in my head, was trying to tie all that together.
Yeah.
Thinking, well, it's interesting that what would you have to say about, you're talking about the little Zeus and God. Is Marcus Aurelius trying to defend the ancient gods like Augustus was, or is he more materialistic, or
yeah, I don't know enough about on the top of my head about Marcus Aurelius, but there are certainly you can take elements of Greek wisdom, and if you decide that this is the complete horizon of thought, and this is everything that human beings are capable of, then when Christianity arrives, it's going to seem like an intruder, something alien, something that can't fit into the system. So either you've got to sort of be receptive and relax and allow this new element in to create a bigger picture, don't you? Which is what we understand the history of thought to be. We believe that there's sort of there's relative completeness and a certain level of truth achieved in Greek philosophy, but then higher truths and other correcting truths came in to balance it and correct it. And the history of thought, particularly, say, up to Aquinas, is about the process of that adjustment until we get this bigger synthesis. But if you're not willing to go beyond that initial horizon of Greek thought, based just on natural reason, then Christianity is going to be not able to synthesize, and it's going to seem, I mean, it is folly. I mean, from Paul says Christianity is folly to the Greeks. So from a purely natural Greek point of view, philosophical, Christianity is folly. even though in another sense, it's a preparation for Christianity, because philosophy can be used to sort of prepare the human spirit to then be more well disposed to the absolute truth. Yeah. We're up to here. Okay. So by living in agreement with divine law or universal reason, we also achieve this internal harmony. And I was reminded of this saying that stuck out to me when I read this philosopher called Kierkegaard. You've heard of Kierkegaard? He's got this book that's called Purity is to Will One Thing. And I'd like to read it one day, but just the phrase, it's always stuck with me, because I think so much of our anxiety and lack of fulfillment and restlessness is to do with the fact that we're divided as human beings. Like, we might have what our ideal project is. We might have a few projects, and then we've got other things that we're interested in, like we're watching the Netflix series. We've got to take the kids to the soccer on Saturday, this and that, and we're just really fragmented and divided. And even so, at the same time, we've got different things going on, and they're not all necessarily coming together in one point. And what Kierkegaard's saying, and it's true, is that to be fulfilled and holiness is when we've got that beautifully pure unity of life, which in the saints you see as simplicity. And modern life is taking that away from us, fragmenting us and making our lives so complex. So when they talk about internal harmony, they mean that throughout time, you're not always changing your projects or changing your mind about things. Or, the person who's inconsistent, one day they'll do the good, one day they'll do what's rational, the next day they'll give into weakness. So consistency over time, always doing what's rational. And also consistency and harmony amongst the different faculties, feeling and reason. And this internal harmony goes hand in hand with harmony with the universe. A lot of this New Age talk, when people talk about, being attuned with the universe and that, it's easy to sort of laugh at that, because it can be just, very superficial and trite. But I think if you take it in a certain way, in this way, I think it's true in a way, because I believe, and this is me speaking now, I believe that God's will and God's wisdom is actually operating through all the universe, and we can tune into that.
Yeah, sometimes I think we can be part of nature.
Yeah.
We're not. We the things that we create might be artificial, but we ourselves are not.
No. Yeah. Having said that, though, when Aquinas and others, and even the Stoics, talk about being attuned to nature, it's not this returning to some primitive, bestial, way of living. It's reason that's operating even in nature. Okay. So, how should we live life to be happy? I've already said these two things. I've got 15 minutes left. For the Stoics, one thing alone is good, and that one thing is happiness, or acting according to reason. And that requires virtue, or it is virtue. In order to have virtue, you need to have knowledge, because in order to act in accordance with reason, you need to understand. You need to be able to distinguish between things that I merely want in my emotions for selfish reasons, or for just emotional reasons, such as acting out of fear, acting out of addiction. those merely emotional, subjective motivations. You need to distinguish between those and I guess you'd call them transcendent, selfless motivations, where you're living in tune with a universal law or a universal reason. And so you need that. That's a type of self-knowledge, but you also need to know physics in order to have this knowledge, because you need to know the structure of the universe. And you also need to distinguish between that one good thing, which is happiness, i.e. virtue, living rationally, and all the things that we encounter in the world, which are indifferent. We should treat them indifferently. They're neither good nor bad. And this is where their view becomes quite radical. So they would say it's indifferent whether you're healthy or unhealthy. Your happiness should not depend on whether you're healthy or unhealthy. Your happiness should not depend on how much money you've got. Your happiness should not depend on the weather, whether you've got friends. In fact, one statement says that if you're being tortured and all of your friends have abandoned you, you're just as happy. If you're living as a Stoic would have you live, you're just as happy as someone else who's enjoying Christmas dinner in a warm house. Mm. Okay.
It's basic.
And the consolations, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thinking also, if you think about what the Stoics are aiming for, and what what's his name, the really one did.
Epicurus.
Epicurus is aiming for. Isn't it really the same thing? Just
No. No.
So what's the definition of happiness? As a Stoic would see it, in relation to
well, Epicurus, Epicurus doesn't talk about an alignment with universal reason. It's just serenity that's had by not having too intense experiences and not being afraid of things. But this natural law stuff isn't in there.
It's a different experience.
Yeah. So this has got a contemplative aspect to it. So you're becoming aware that you're in tune with the universe, with the Logos, or with Zeus. It's got a religious, transcendent aspect to it. Whereas Epicureanism, it's more about just enjoying the fine things of life, whether it's wine, friendship, good food, nature, and so forth. That's a good question. Good question. I mean, those sorts of questions are the questions you'd get when you get to utilitarianism with Bentham and Mill, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, because one version of utilitarianism said that we should just pursue any pleasure, but then a more refined version says there are higher pleasures and lower pleasures. The higher pleasure would be, say, coming to my lecture, reading fine literature, listening classical music.
So
what's happened here is that we've teased apart all these questions, and I'm unable to solve all these. They're just loose threads, okay? They're great questions. But for Epicureans, they wouldn't. I don't think they'd believe in the nobility of this. That longing restlessness. Epicureans not because Plato, at least, that eros is restlessness away from this world, even though beautiful things in this world awaken our desire, we still have this thrust away. And there is a restlessness. Epicureans don't think like that.
But that's sort of saying it's interesting.
Yeah. 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 So this is quite a radical thesis because taken to its logical conclusion, someone whose wife had just died in a car accident and their children had been abducted, the Stoic should be able to just be indifferent. It's like, that doesn't affect my happiness, Whereas more common sense, realistic, ordinary point of view, and even a Christian point of view on that is that we are vulnerable human beings. We're connected with each other. So our happiness, in a certain sense, does depend on others. It's a subtle point because on one hand, we want to say as Christians that I rely on God alone and God alone is enough for me. And that's true in the next life. And it's even true in this life in the sense that our spiritual satisfaction comes from God alone. But life is more messy than that, here and now. And because we don't have the beatific vision, our happiness does depend on things like our health, a connection to family, and so forth. And if it didn't, then the cross wouldn't be possible. There has to be that possibility of unhappiness on a natural level in order therefore to be sacrificed in the cross, right? Yeah. So, yeah, the Stoic point of view doesn't really have room for the cross or for interpersonal connection at a deep level, because everyone is radically self-sufficient because all I need to be happy is to be virtue, and I can be virtuous through my own power. So radically self-sufficient in two senses. One, you don't need grace. So we're not dependent on God for our salvation. Although there is this relation with Zeus, and you have to be attuned with this principle, there's no grace there. There's no supernatural, gratuitous revelation of God. And there's no forgiveness and no offering of grace or the healing of the spirit and so forth. So you still fundamentally got that natural Greek situation of Pelagian, what you'd call Pelagianism, is that salvation, happiness, ultimate happiness is achievable through human power alone, and there's no understanding of the fall. Yeah. Yeah, Nietzsche's Greek in that sense of it's hard to pin down though, Nietzsche. At the end of the day, I think it's hard just to make definite statements about Nietzsche, but depending on which book you're talking about, if your ethos of life is the will to power, it's like there's no vulnerability in that.
And that's
relational vulnerability. Sorry?
Something very attractive about, particularly the concept of sort of the warrior.
Mm.
I think most men, I don't know about women, but most men have, that's almost a temptation.
Yeah, well, I think it's half the truth. I think we need a bit of it. It's like we need a bit of that autonomy. And it certainly did well for them because this was a very tumultuous time. Empires were falling down, law was breaking down. So because people couldn't rely on the environment being the source of their happiness or being stable, they had to turn within. That's what's often said about Stoicism, is that it's an effect of that turmoil. But what I was saying is that I think there are parts of it that are aspects of that self-dependence that are true, but if you take it to its logical conclusion, it's not compatible with Christianity because it's not relational enough, and it doesn't have room for grace. Compare it with Aristotle. Aristotle says that at a certain level of happiness, we need friends. We need a certain amount of money as well. So luck is involved. Luck meaning things that aren't in our control. And this is an idea I read in John Milbank, is that grace is like the Christian version of Aristotle's luck, because grace is not in our control, and we need grace to be happy and fulfilled. Epicureans, there's no luck and no dependence in the system. It's very self-sufficient. Yes, except in this case, they still believe that there is a rational order, whereas I'm not sure whether experience would have rational order in it. Yeah. Whereas I think happiness, as I understand it, and this is coming from a philosopher called Dietrich von Hildebrand, happiness comes from your engagement with and receptivity to that which is intrinsically good, intrinsically valuable. So let's say his example would be, one of his examples is, someone can say have a temperamental inclination to be a nurse or to be a mother, right? And someone can act motherly in such a way that they're just unfolding their own inclinations in nature, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But what von Hildebrand says is that if you're going to be truly satisfied in your vocation, it should be your responding to something for its own sake, not just because I'm trying to fulfill myself, but because it's good. So, that satisfaction that people say they get from, say, helping the poor or doing something that's good in itself. Yeah, so the paradox is that the satisfaction can only happen when you're not seeking it for its own sake. You've got to be interested in doing what's right and what's good, and also interested in appreciating what's beautiful, truly beautiful in itself. So that's that version of ethics, happiness. What Marie was talking about is mere experience. If your account of experience doesn't include what's true, good and beautiful, then that experience collapses back into the self, and all you're doing is you're in a dream world interacting with yourself, and it's void. It's void. It's empty. And people will try and transcend. People want to be happy, but they're not doing it the right way. They're trying to transcend themselves by intensifying their experience, and also trying to enter into the irrational, the Dionysian, as Benedict XVI would say. So forms of music or drugs or sexual activity in which we leave the realm of reason and enter into the irrational, the dark and irrational. And there are versions of that which are ritualistic and occultish, satanic. And that is just the religious desire for happiness twisted. And the best example I can think of is, I used to live in Tasmania, and every year they have a Dark Mofo festival. There's a lot of that in it. So what Mofo understands is that reality is religious, sacramental, but for them they're taking the dark side of that. And I think what people are fed up with secular materialism, and they know that reality is more deep and more interesting than that, but they might reject or not know about Christianity, so they'll go to this other. Yeah. That's it for me, unless you've got questions. Sorry, passions. Let's just do passions. So for the Stoics, there's nothing wrong with having emotions that come up, feelings. They only turn into passions in a negative sense when you consent to them. And a good example I can think of is, say someone's really irritating you, and this, if you really observe what's going on when someone's irritating you or someone's done something wrong to you, there's two levels to it. One is the feeling comes, but you haven't owned it. You haven't made it yours. Or the irritation, you can sort of dwell on it and turn it into something into a grudge, something you're resenting. So that's when it becomes yours. And the other example, which is a classic one, you explain it to your children, is that it's okay to feel angry. It's what you do with it. So passions are when you let these non-rational emotions start to change how you think and act. So these are the passions. And virtue is when you never act out of these passions and always according to reason, because passions, in this sense, never agree with reason. Yes.
How much of the decision due to personality? Because I find sort of Stoic type personality sort of cool, methodical, rational. And then there are other people who are very passionate, very excited. And I find those two things sort of boring myself. I would really like to feel methodic person who will always be in charge, but I've got to deal with this. It's a crazy person on the other side, very passionate.
Yeah, my view.
Fluctuating moods.
Yeah, my view is if, let's say, the picture, that the image that comes to mind is you're out in a boat. You've been out in a boat with a sail and changed the sail and everything, and a mirror, one of those mirrors. Yeah, I've done that too. The first time I did it, I didn't know what to do. My friend didn't explain it to me, and then when the boat was like this, I just jumped out because I didn't know you have to sit on the edge. Anyway, so you adjust your sail. Just imagine that there are different emotions, are like different winds coming from different directions. You adjust your sail. So you can't necessarily determine, short term, you can't determine what emotions you're having, but you can adjust how much of it is going to affect you. Yeah, you adjust your sail. But then long term, you can, and there's a whole thousands of years tradition on how you do this. You can shape your character so that over time, hearing my child eat next to me is going to be less and less irritating because, I don't know, other things are, I'm less uptight or something, or my love for them wins out. Yeah. But it's a good question. Yeah. And your question raises an important point, is that I'm giving you the bare bones to give you the overall structure, but there are lots of other questions that raise it. And one of them is free will and the interaction between reason and emotion. Plato, remember, had this view where you've got reason and then passion, which are warring. And weakness of will is when the passions win over reason. The Stoics are different. they believe it's reason versus reason. So you choose whether your will is going to give way to reason or to passion. So it's the same part of you that's wavering depending on what it concedes to. Whereas the picture Plato gives is that there's different horses that are, yeah. The end.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.